Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. We are continuing with the first semi-final match, and this is game 3. Nakamura lost the first 2 games, so now he needs to win 2 games in a row to get back into the match and force Armageddon. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with e4, and Nakamura, for this special occasion where he really needs to get back into the match, goes for g6, the so-called modern defense, also it's known as the Robatsch defense. So Carlsen grabs the center, which is very principled. If your opponent develops on the flank, you want to grab as many central squares as possible. We have d6 by Nakamura and knight to f3. We have bishop to g7, and now comes bishop to e2. We have e6, and now Carlsen just castles. And now Nakamura already had this position on the board. I think few times knight to e7 is the move you usually play here, but here he plays h6, and it is already as of move 5 that we have a completely new game. So what do you do here? c4. Magnus grabs more space in the center, and now comes g5. So already saying that maybe g4 will also be an idea in the future, just further pushing those pawns on the king side. We have knight to c3, Magnus just continues developing, and knight to e7. Now, saying that probably black will be castling king's side. And Magnus goes h4, saying what's the idea behind those advanced pawns here. So Nakamura, of course, pushes g4. We have knight back to e1, for the moment a passive square, but the knight can be rerouted very simply into the game. And now h5, strengthening that g4 pawn. And bishop to g5 by Magnus. Now that you no longer have the h6 pawn, the bishop will be very, very strong on g5. However, Nakamura immediately dislodges it with f6. Now, is this one of those positions where it's actually okay to play f6? We'll just have to wait and see. So now you have to retreat, bishop back to e3, and now Nakamura just castles. And Magnus now has to decide how to deal with this. It's a very unusual position, sort of a Pirc-like position, but with the pawns very advanced to h4 and g4. And f3 seems to be very strong for white here. For example, you either capture and then you open up all of the files and diagonals for white, or you go f5, and let's say after captures, you again get the g5 square, and it's just going to be a very, very strong position for white. You can also just continue pushing your h pawn, which will be good for white. So instead of f3, Magnus goes for d5. He strikes in the center, and now Nakamura replies by going f5. And okay, now that the pawn again moved from f6, Magnus retreats with the bishop to g5. We have bishop to g5, and now queen to e8, unpinning, so the knight can now finally get into the game. And now the very interesting c5, not allowing Nakamura a moment rest to start developing his queenside pieces. Point is, if you want to capture on c5, then you get this very annoying knight to b5. The threat is knight captures on c7, forking the queen and the rook, and after, let's say, knight to a6, then d6 comes, and well, it's just not only very, very unpleasant, but it's very hard to calculate what's happening here. But white should definitely have the upper hand. So instead, after c5, Nakamura goes for f captures on e4. We have c captures on d6 by Magnus, captures on d6, captures on e6, bishop captures on e6, and now knight captures on e4. So grabbing that pawn, putting pressure on the d6 pawn, and knight to f5. Nakamura offers up the d6 pawn if Magnus is interested in capturing here twice. However, Magnus just continues developing. We have knight to d3. He's not interested in the pawn. It's an isolated d pawn, and he's very confident that he will be able to pick it up later on in the game, and also development, before material. So knight to c6, or as we usually like to say, activity above all. So knight to c6, Nakamura also continues developing, and now knight to f4, putting pressure on the bishop here. Also, it's just very unpleasant having these two knights here controlling all of these squares. So knight c to d4, just grabbing more space in the center, now putting pressure on the bishop here, and bishop d3, not allowing the capture, and just putting it to a more optimal square, controlling this diagonal. We have bishop to e5 by Nakamura, and we have reached the position from the thumbnail. Magnus goes rook to e1, aligns the rook with the queen on the e file, and queen to f7 by Nakamura. But now, feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for white here while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the best tactic here. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight captures on d6. Knight captures on d6 because after everything opens up, it's well, it's just winning a pawn, and all of the trades really favor black, because even if you get this position with pretty much all of the pieces except the queens and rooks off the board, then black's king is just very naked here, and it will be very hard to defend. So now the point is, of course, the queen is under attack. You're also putting pressure on the knight here. So bishop captures on d6, and now comes bishop captures on f5, opening up an attack towards the knight here. So knight captures here, also defending the bishop on d6. However, now there's a double attack on the bishop on e6. So knight captures on e6, putting pressure on the rook here. Rook f to e8 by Nakamura, and now as the knight is attacked twice, queen b3, adding another defender to the knight. Nakamura goes g3, wants to open up the Carlsen's king. We have f captures on g3. Carlsen not worried about it because the knight here, as long as the knight is here, you don't have bishop to c5 check, and then well, it could be very unpleasant. And here Nakamura took several minutes to decide how to go about the position, as it's not at all clear how to continue. White definitely has a lot of pressure here. He goes for knight captures on g3. It either works or it doesn't. It's not very pleasant for white either. Also, it guards the f1 square, so you don't have rook to f1 in the future. But Magnus finds a very nice idea, rook to e3. The idea is you want to add another defender here with rook e1, double up here, so the knight is defended, and then this rook can come to f3, put pressure on the queen, and slowly but surely make progress here. Because if the queen was not on f7, then you would have all sorts of nasty discoveries available due to this relationship between the queen and king. So Nakamura continues development. Rook 8 to c8 brings the rook into the game, and Magnus does the same. Rook 8 to e1. Now the knight is very nicely defended, and rook to f3 is now again a possibility. We have rook to c6 by Nakamura. Now with ideas of if maybe rook to b6 can come, you're also adding another attacker here. Maybe you can shift the bishop somehow. Maybe you will be able to give up the exchange for maybe rook captures on e6 to free the c5 square for the bishop. So there could be a lot of possibilities here. However, Magnus doesn't allow Nakamura, again, a moment's rest. So rook to f3 puts pressure on the queen, and now you have to move the queen. And after Nakamura moved the queen, he played queen to g6, but now nothing is preventing all sorts of nasty discoveries. So once again, feel free to pause the video and try to find the nastiest discovery while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. Pretty much any discovery here is nasty, like knight to f4 is a possibility. You go for the queen. Although you have to be careful. If you go for the queen, then you might run into some rook captures on e1, and with the knight being defended here could be very, very unpleasant. So instead of going for this knight to f4, Magnus goes for the cleaner solution, knight to c7 check, for those of you who just want to enjoy the show. And it was also in this position on move 30 that Hikaru Nakamura resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. There is now check to the black king, there is a double attack on the rook here, so whatever you play is completely losing. So for example, if king to h7, you first go rook f7 check, so after you force the king to the back rank, now you capture here with check, and there's nothing more to be done here. You can give up some pieces, but let's say queen here, just let's say a discovery here, the queen, you cannot capture with the queen because it's check, so you have to capture with something like king captures, and then queen captures on g8 will just be checkmate. And of course, every other line also wins. So, very nicely played by Magnus, winning all 3 games against Nakamura in their first semi-final match. So, like I said, this does not mean that Magnus goes straight into the finals of the Lindores Abbey. They now go into the second match, and now Hikaru will have his chance to beat Magnus in the second match, to force a third match, and only then will we have the first finalist of this Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. So, Nakamura has his work cut out for him. We'll see what happens in the next match. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it and my short coverage of this very nice match. I would like to thank Jeffrey Netting, Gerd Decker, Ishmael Said, Stephen Green, and Henry Spraggins for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Lindores Abbey, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.